I'm the one physician, but I maybe have 2 or 3 PAs and 25 medics, and they're scattered all across the continent, and there's still only one of me. And so through that scarcity, and it's very much similar to what's happened with the pandemic, right? The availability of in-person brick and mortar visits has gone down, but the demand for healthcare has stayed the same, and it's also increased because people are sick. And so what do you do? And so again, telehealth, the ability to extend ourselves virtually into places where we aren't physically present to practice medicine, was born out of scarcity in 2015. Also, you know, born out of scarcity or necessity now during the pandemic. But I do think it takes a little bit of bravery. You have to be brave. We have to be able to break out of that mindset of, I physically have to lay hands on a patient to know what direction to go with them. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
And it's just very unscripted, so don't worry about it.
Love it.
I'm scripted. He is unscripted. That's how it works.
I'm unhinged, perhaps. That's the proper word.
Okay.
Unhinged.
Great.
Is that your New Year's resolution? Unhinged?
That's maybe to get hinged, actually.
Like your top shirt button.
That's right. You know, you give the fans what they want. That's right.
Anywho, welcome back to Recommended Daily Dose. I'm Dr. Clenton Coleman, along with my unhinged colleague, Dr. Suraj Saggar. We have a wonderful guest, Dr. Laura Purdy. She is a board-certified family medicine physician and an expert in virtual health. At least we have an expert in the room, unlike either one of us, but thank you for coming. She is the co-founder of 2 telehealth companies, including MD Integration. So she's here with us to discuss all the innovations in telehealth and how it's impacted healthcare today. So welcome.
Dr. Purdy, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Nice to meet you guys. I love it. I'm happy to be here, hinged or otherwise.
Excellent. And I know I told you that I need a little break from COVID since we're experiencing the feared Omicron surge in the hospital. But you know, I figure we're gonna have to talk about it in some shape, way, or form. So if we're talking about telehealth, but before we dive into your companies, what you do, how you got there, you know, tell us a little about your background.
Sure, love to do it. So like you mentioned, I'm a board certified family medicine physician. I actually spent my first, I guess, 14 years in the military. I just got out of the Army in May of 2021. And so it's kind of interesting, you know, back in 2004 is when I was applying for medical school. And you guys probably remember back in those days of yellow ribbons everywhere and like USA and, you know, people fist pumping in the streets. So USA, and that's all that you could see on the news was footage from the Middle Eastern. And so my dad said, you know, I'm not going to pay for your grad school. And I was kind of in the middle of all that. And so I ended up joining the military to go to medical school. And so the way that it works is it's nothing to do but leadership positions. You know, I feel like it's rare that you just be a doctor and only practice and don't get put in charge of something.
Sure.
So I did outpatient, I did inpatient.
Unless you're Dr. Coleman, which in that case, you were not.
I'm in charge of a lot of things.
Sorry, I apologize. I digress. I'm sorry. Keep going. There's a reason why he's not in charge. There's a reason why I'm in charge, not him, but keep going.
That's hysterical. So I just did, you know, hospitalist, I think is what I love, is to be a hospitalist. And I did med peds and, but I've done like full scope outpatient, you know, multi disciplinary, like disability clinic type of things. And so I did all of that in the Army. But I think the reason why it's important to bring that up is I think from like a business perspective, an entrepreneurial perspective, and an innovation perspective, you learn how to get creative with limited resources when you work for the federal government.
Sure. Yeah.
It's true.
I mean, you know, it's what you do.
It's just like if you work at the VA, right? Same idea.
Exactly same. Probably.
When you think about it, the military and government is usually at the forefront of most technological innovations. I'm interested in how that translates to medicine. So.
Yep,
Yeah, but like you said, the resource is not always there. So I mean, you're gonna have to make do with less, right, and do more.
Yes. I mean, I think the first telehealth visits I ever did was when my medics would deploy to Africa. Was our country that we were over, was our area of operations. And they were there without physician oversight. They were highly trained critical care paramedic level type of medics. And we all had iPhones. So they would call and text me from Africa. We had ruptured appendixes, trauma.
Wow.
We had gunshot wounds. I mean, we had, rare diseases for here that are common in Africa. And so that was the first telemedicine that I did. But I started moonlighting doing telemedicine while I was in the Army, realized that I could make it into a career. So figured out how to build that up so that as I was exiting the Army, I could be fully launched and ready to go without any sort of downtime into telehealth. So that's how it started.
Quick question: Is that common in the military, like more remote care? Because I'm used to, not me, but Dr. Suraj used to seeing, he grew up in the MASH era where, the physicians
I'm
were
not that old,
in
man.
the
Come
field.
on, what are you talking about?
I'll explain that.
Didn't you apply for the military, Clinton, but you couldn't do a push-up? Was not the problem?
Yes, that's what happened.
2 push-ups. All right.
I ran to Canada.
That's right.
Anyway, because that's around 2004, 2005. Is that correct?
That particular, so I did school first and I did residency. So that was around 2015.
Okay. But even then,
telehealth was not that common back then.
Yeah,
it's not that common at all, right?
You think, was that a majority of the care in the military? Is it virtual visits or telehealth?
Yeah, because I think what you're getting at is that this has become almost like super popular right now. And that's why I wanted to get to it, was that it seems like you were definitely ahead of the curve. And maybe it's because of reflection of the military, but I feel like with the advent of COVID, especially in 2020, and then when it receded, a lot of people were like, you know what, for lifestyle reasons, for accessibility reasons, even for patient preference, especially the younger millennials and below, maybe not the baby boomers like Dr. Coleman, but they prefer it. So I guess, but it seems like you were actually an early adopter, or seeing this. So I guess what we're interested to know is is that a reflection of the military, or is that something you foresaw, that this is something that can be really, from an entrepreneur point of view, be advocated for, and that people would actually be interested? Because a lot of people thought, for instance, that it was COVID, people that weren't going to see the doctor, and once COVID receded or vaccines were available, people would stop with the televisits, and that clearly is not the case.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like in both instances, what we're doing in the military, because the way that it works is obviously it's almost like market economics with supply and demand. The supply of the need for patient care the demand for the need for patient care far exceeds the supply of physicians, right? And so I'm the one physician, but I maybe have 2 or 3 PAs and 25 medics, and they're scattered all across the continent, and there's still only one of me. And so through that scarcity, and it's very much similar to what's happened with the pandemic, right? The availability of in-person brick and mortar visits has gone down, but the demand for healthcare has stayed the same, and it's also increased because people are sick. And so what do you do? And so again, telehealth, the ability to extend ourselves virtually into places where we aren't physically present to practice medicine, was born out of scarcity in 2015. Also, born out of scarcity or necessity now during the pandemic. But I do think it takes a little bit of bravery. You have to be brave. We have to be able to break out of that mindset of, I physically have to lay hands on a patient to know what direction to go with them. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And so it takes a little bit of bravery, a little bit of creativity, and good technology to be able to pull it off.
So speaking of technology, what are you utilizing? There's a lot of ways some people just do FaceTime, right? But then you worry about the HIPAA laws, and then people will use Doximity dialer, and so that's the idea, is like, how do you develop a telehealth platform, or and what do you look into it? Is it just patient privacy? And then how do you see technology advancing? Because that's one thing I'll hear from people. Well, it's great, but how do you get vitals? But what if, or if someone has a wearable watch or wearable technology, maybe they can transmit the vitals to you. And do you foresee like technology even advancing further so you can get an EKG or, hold up the phone to the heart and look at least, an EKG or, or other things you wouldn't normally be able to do from just a face-to-face. So I'm very interested to see, like, your thoughts about where that technology is headed.
Yeah. So to speak on your first point, the interesting thing about the pandemic, so the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the DEA, kind of came together because there's a bit of a controlled substance component to this. In March of 2020, when the pandemic first started, they actually loosened a lot of the HIPAA laws with regard to what interfaces you could use.
That's right, yeah.
Telehealth visits. And if you read the language, I have a lot of respect for the way they worded it, because it says if the physician is acting within their scope of practice, which always needs to be the case,
of course,
it says if they're acting in good faith, right? So if you're not committing Medicare fraud or, running a virtual narcotics pill mill or something like that. And then the third thing is, acting standard of care, right? So providing standard of care medicine within your scope of practice, acting in good faith, then they have given us the liberty to use our best judgment based on what virtual consultation platforms we use. Because not every patient knows how to do Zoom, Skype, Doximity, WhatsApp, FaceTime, maybe they're Android. And so it's really hard to level that playing field because the options are so vast and there's not one universal way that we do telehealth. So the government has actually helped us out a little bit in saying, we trust you. If you're trying to do the right thing, we're not going to come and send you to jail for FaceTiming your patients during the pandemic. Right. So I appreciate that. The second thing that you touched on, we actually call that remote patient monitoring, and the ability to get more. So there's a lot of telehealth that you really don't need objective data for. Like if a woman comes to me and they say, I took Augmentin last week and I'm having some itching and some discharge, I don't really have to necessarily get a blood pressure before I can send diflucan.
Yeah, sure.
And there's other things like that too, like dermatologic conditions, like poison ivy. I don't really need to know what their respiratory rate is or, what their heart rate is in order to, send some triamcinolone. And a lot of telehealth is really low hanging fruit. Lately, within the last year or so, we have extended that same acting in good faith to the patient's principle as we have, as we've been extended as physicians. So blood pressure is really an interesting point of controversy, because when patients come to telehealth, they do sign waivers that say, I understand that my physician is making the best decision they can with the information that I give them.
Right. I think that was a big reason why a lot of doctors didn't do virtual visits or even telephone visits or prescribe by phone was the liability. Like, you say you didn't have a yeast infection or you didn't have a UTI and I gave you an antibiotic and you had a side effect, there was some liability, doctor, you didn't see that patient or evaluate that patient, would that stand up in court? So I think that was one of the reasons, but I also think that liability was balanced by reimbursement. So we saw that, during the pandemic that, previously telephone visits and televisits weren't really reimbursed well. So that kind of balances that liability you have to take. So I think, it's funny that, scarcity and need are important, but there's certain, I guess, how do I say it? One of the people in this room, not me, subscribes to an online service where you can order male hair growth products, like things like that. You see an increase in, like, I think it's Hims. What's the name of the company you subscribe to? Hims?
Soul Glow.
Right. But the point is that there's certain parts of the industry where remote telehealth, especially, male hair growth, even female hair growth, you can actually, testosterone, things like that, you can.
Testosterone's another one, yeah.
Yeah, you can remotely talk to a physician and get the medication. So I know that was a lot, but I think the real question is, do you think that the liability and the reimbursement has changed it for the better?
Very much so. A lot of services are cash pay. I mean, if you go online, you'll find people who've recently gone to jail for shady practices. But the bottom line in all of that is universally insurance fraud is what it comes down to.
Yeah,
and I think just as many people in the brick and mortar get in trouble for insurance fraud.
That's true. And, probably more. You know, yeah.
Probably more. Yeah, probably more. But I've been following the several states. So I'm licensed in 48 states currently, hopefully 51 by the end of the year. But I've been following disciplinary action reports of several of the states because I want to know what types of things people are getting in trouble for. And the punishments that are currently being dealt out are far worse than in good, you know, doing in good faith evaluations in order to try and provide good care for people during the pandemic. And folks are committing crimes and being heinous and coming to work drunk and, you know, doing drugs while they're taking care of patients and sexually taking advantage of their patients and, you know, doing horrific things, and they're getting disciplined for that. But right now I have not seen, and patients do complain. Patients try to sue just like they do in the brick and mortar world, but you know, having good technology that is protects their information, has good tech and data safeguards, having SOPs, having intake forms, and having documentation of everything the patient says and everything the doctor does, including all the waivers that they sign that says you understand virtual health has limitations and we're doing the best we can. All of those make that defensible argument. So that sure, they can try to take you to court, but the likelihood that you're going to lose a malpractice suit acting in good faith over telehealth, I have personally never seen it happen.
Interesting.
You know, and so before we dive into like your specific telehealth platforms and your business and how you came upon that, are you seeing more physicians? So, you know, a big thing, you know, we've talked about in our show before is physician burnout, right? I mean, infectious disease doc, you know, it's been like nonstop work, right? And the ER docs, ICU docs, and I think medicine in general, I follow different Facebook and different other online physician resources. And there's the advent of people doing side gigs and entrepreneurship and, you know, physicians on fire, financial independence retire early. So you see a lot of people looking to say, hey, you know what, I don't want to sacrifice my entire life for medicine. I want to do medicine on my own terms. And so I'm seeing more and more interest in locum tenens, as well as telehealth as a way to battle physician burnout, because they can say, I can take a break. I can be at home with my children, especially during the pandemic. And I don't have to go to a brick and mortar store. So are you seeing a more, I guess, what kind of people are you seeing? Are you seeing that are looking to do telehealth, not just as adjunct, but perhaps as a full-time gig? Or are you seeing that? Or is it mostly people who are doing it as adjunct or side to their clinical day job?
Yeah, I see it all. I mean, honestly, that's the beauty of telehealth, is that it is not one size fits all. And a lot of times what I'll kind of challenge people, doctors who are thinking about getting into it, because there's tele ID right now. Can you remind me, Dr. Coleman, what is your specialty?
Nephrology.
There is telenephrology right now. It's out there.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Wow.
Indeed. Because that's one of the things I do is I kind of watch the job boards, because it helps me understand directions that the industries are going in. Because usually people hire several months before they go live. And tele-specialty care, there are active jobs on Indeed right now for telenephrology, teleneurology, teleendocrinology. Really? Yep, well, menopause.
Nephrology is really like a thinking man's profession, unlike ID, where you can just
you're more the heroes of the pandemic or the heroes of the last several years.
Yes,
that's true.
You are a hero.
Thank you.
You are a hero.
Thank you.
It's all going to come back to the pandemic.
And we said we weren't going to talk about it. Is that something
we can't get away from?
We have to.
No, my phone's been ringing off the hook here. Well, you know, about COVID.
Are there I know family medicine is probably up there. Are there common other specialties that you see the trend towards telehealth?
Women's health, psych, I imagine, would be another big one, no?
Yeah.
There is a huge need. There's a huge need for mental health practitioners of all kinds. I mean, honestly, there's the demand far exceeds the supply in mental health as well. I mean, folks are flocking online to get their mental health care, and the volume of people is astronomical. I mean, that is an epidemic in and of itself, right? Mental health is an epidemic right now. You know, I think
it was always there, just been exacerbated by the pandemic, right? And
correct.
it was brought to the forefront, thankfully, but I think it was woefully kind of swept under the rug, and it wasn't, people didn't always want to talk about it. So I think that's one of the positives that have come out, is that, mental health, like you said, is an issue, and then we need to just take away any stigma associated with that.
Tell us about your company, and how do you, I guess, tackle this burgeoning, this drive in telemedicine
trend. This trend.
Yes,
that's the word you're looking for, my friend.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The wave of the future. So, the interesting thing about being a virtualist, so those of us that do full-time telemedicine or even part-time telemedicine, it's virtualist. I believe that in a couple of decades, it's actually going to be a specialty, because it's a totally different, it's a very nuanced, very different. The medicine is the same, but the execution is a little different.
Sure, of course.
So, but the thing about, but you out there is there's this aspect to telehealth that it's a startup world. Unless you choose to work for institutional telehealth, which is MD Live, Teladoc, Amwell, the large health systems, you have big telehealth, and then you have kind of mom and pop telehealth, right?
Right.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so if you don't kind of sell out and go work for institutional telehealth as a W-2 with HEDIS measures and 40 hours a week, if you don't want it to be completely analogous to your day job, because it can't, if that's what you want it to look like, right? With time tracking and hours and productivity and RVUs and all that. And
all the things that make medicine, to suck the soul out of medicine. Yeah.
Right. You can actually do telehealth that way. There are companies that are doing it that way. But if you don't want to do it that way, then the way to do it is to kind of market yourself or work with or for co-founders of smaller companies. But as a trade-off, they will often be early stage, maybe underfunded until they raise money, and then they're going to be low volume. So the way to make that into something that replaces your full-time income, you have to work for several companies.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So one of the companies that I founded, one of the projects that I've worked on is MD Integrations, which is essentially an API and a web portal and a 50-state physician network. So if you wanted to start a company, Dr. CMD tomorrow, doing just beauty cream, prescription tretinoin or something like that, you could say, hey, MD Integrations, I want to launch this nationwide a month from now. And all you have to work on is your own personal business development, marketing, branding, and all that. But the medicine and the EMR is plugged in for you. That's how it works.
Amazing.
So that's very interesting. Can I ask you, your background? Do you have an MBA as well? Things like business development, entrepreneurship, is something you just learned on the fly while you're in the Army, then applied it when you came out into the civilian world? Or is interested to see how this developed for you?
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
So my dad actually was a businessman, had an MBA, and I think had an entrepreneurial heart. But when I was growing up, those were the types of dinner table conversations we had. We would just sit around and talk business. And I thought it was a lot of fun. We would talk HR, we would talk operations, we would talk quality improvement when I was a middle schooler and a high schooler. And so I feel like that was already, and I watched him go through Lean Six Sigma and go through finance classes. And I thought it was really interesting, but I ended up going into medicine. And so I feel like it's been a natural extension of that. And so I got my MBA because I did get an MBA and wrote my thesis on the pandemic. We're not going to be able to not talk about it.
That's true.
But my master's project was a business plan. And it was actually a business plan to start a telehealth company, but predicated on what was happening during the pandemic. So I finished at the end of 2020. So anyways, so I feel like it was kind of already there in my blood, and I really had that in my upbringing. And as I started working with telehealth companies, you're sitting around a table with business folks as the only doctor, not understanding half the things that are coming out of people, kind of like sitting in a room of nephrologists, right? I have no idea what they're saying.
It's true.
And
it's all GFR and credit clearance. It's all, when you break it down to it.
It's all math.
It's all mumbo jumbo. Yeah. Potassium bath, that's all. I could do that.
Tubules and glomerulus, and I don't know.
I feel like you guys are making fun of me. But honestly, like I had never thought of telehealth until the pandemic. Like, I mean, it was available, but it was like, you know, I don't know if it's difficult for me to interpret things on the phone and not actually examining the patient. But when we weren't able to see patients because the office was, I mean, physically able to see patients because the office was shut down, we started doing telehealth visits, and like, I don't think we've looked back. It's been, you know, a good adjunct to our practice.
So Dr. Purdy, just tell us a little bit more about your company, where people can find you, and then, you know, exactly like if you were to, I would say break it down, talk like a 6-year-old, or talk to Dr. Coleman, like how would you describe what it actually does? You know, like, are you saying that it is one physician A could both work for your company or also utilize it as they're developing their own niche telehealth practice? I guess I'm just trying to understand like how your company comes into play.
Yeah. So our customer is businesses. And
I see.
Yeah, the vast majority. So this is probably going to blow your mind, but the vast majority of telehealth companies that come into existence right now, like the small gee whiz up and coming innovator startup, has no physicians on their executive team. And they don't have any physician advisors, and they don't even know any doctors. You know, maybe they had a friend who's a doctor that had a conversation with them, or maybe they found somebody to be a mentor to them, but at the ground level, they have no idea how to actually do the medicine.
Sounds like an insurance company.
Yeah, like, right. Yeah.
That's good.
Totally. 100%. And so what they do, so usually it'll be a business person and the tech person, or a business person and a finance person, or a lawyer and a finance person, as a founder team. And so, or a nurse, right? Or someone who's not a physician. So those founders come to us basically as the vendor of all the medicine.
And did you start this with like, I mean, did you have VC backing? How did you, or do you just start this with your own, not asking particularly about finances, but did you have backing from industry or from private sources, or, you know, how does someone even come into this idea that I'm going to start this business model?
Yeah. So I would say that the first thing that happened is we lived it.
Yeah.
So lived it. We got in there and worked as a telehealth. We worked that telehealth grind for several years, identified all the problems, realized that the solutions weren't being made. And so they say, like, if you know, don't complain about something unless you're going to propose a solution, right? Unless you can do it better. So what we did is we fixed the technology, we fixed the solutions. And honestly, it hasn't really been that expensive. We did take we went through a startup accelerator program to help us understand the business aspects that we didn't already know: pitch decks, investor decks, financial projections, some of those, legal, some of that type of stuff that still you wouldn't inherently know until you had actually executed a startup on your own.
Sure.
There was a small investment there, but because we are doctors and we understand what the platform needs to look like, really don't need any additional advisors. It really hasn't been that expensive and has been immediately profitable. I mean, within the first 90 days, blown it out of the water, growing exponentially. The month over month growth has been crazy. And we have maybe 20 companies or so that are using the platform right now. And the doctors actually, so as internists, are you guys both internists?
Yeah.
I mean, internists train, both internal medicine, then, nephrology and infectious disease specialty. Yeah. Okay,
great. So the way that works is, let's say you wanted to be on the network, right? So you sign the contract and you have a login for the system. Because you're an internist, even if we don't have any tele ID right now, but what if we did, right? But you would actually be eligible to work on companies that do infectious diseases, which we actually do have like an STD, like an STD testing company or something that, then provides, chlamydia treatment or trichomoniasis treatment if they come back positive. No HIV treatment, but, if we had somebody smart enough to know how to do that, you could. Wink, wink, so.
What about COVID treatment? We're back to the pandemic. It's like, a lot of our current telehealth is, COVID related.
Or even long COVID. I think that's an area you should look into in terms of patient. Probably 2 to 3 out of 10 patients will have some degree of long COVID for 6 months or more. And that's certainly, as this pandemic spreads and more percentage of the population gets infected, that's going to be a larger percentage of people who have brain fog, which Dr. Coleman can attest to, or any other typical long COVID symptoms. But that's very fascinating,
So can you walk us through the process? Because Dr. Saggar wants to set up his STD clinic. So he has to get licensed in 48, 51 states, or how does...
There's only 50 states, but just so you know.
Have to.
51.
So the way that it works, way that our service works is you're not setting up your own clinic. You are 1099 contractors treating any companies that we are the vendor to. You can license the software and do your own SaaS version, software as a service, where you just pay to use the technology, but we don't send you patients. And that is a perfectly easy way to do it. But once you sign up, if you sign up to be a contractor, like if you 1099 with the company, then you log in and basically you get put into the round robin of whatever companies you qualify to work for. It actually can be more lucrative for folks who have single licenses or just a few number of licenses, because you could do men's health. You could do, to some extent, women's health as you feel comfortable. You could do hair loss. You could do a lot of dermatology as an internist, because that's all in your wheelhouse. You could do infectious disease. You could do telenephrology if we had that type of client. But as an internist, you would qualify to work for several different companies. So you would be taught the protocols, which are just standard of care practice of medicine. And then you'd be toggled on. So all throughout the day, patients will be sent to you in a round robin fashion according to the state licenses that you have. And then you just do the cases as they come through.
But I would imagine in order to, increase your patient load, you probably would want to be licensed in multiple states. As of now, I'm only licensed in New Jersey. So, but remotely, I mean, your reach is as far as much time as you have in the day. So.
Exactly. Yes.
And Dr. Purdy, can you just tell us a little bit about where listeners can find you, whether it's on the web, if there's any social media handles, et cetera, learn more information?
We don't call it the web anymore.
We don't. We call it the dark web? Oh, the metaverse. The
metaverse. Oh, do you have any thoughts on that? I didn't get my my virtual goggles yet, but I've been looking into it. That's an interesting concept. Imagine.
The metaverse as telehealth.
Yeah, going to see your doctor in a virtual brick and mortar.
It's a matter of time. It's a matter of time.
It's going to happen. The technology is. I am very excited about where technology is going, because all of these bright, innovative, entrepreneurial minds that are out there just coming up with these great ideas and looking for somebody to help them do it. It's going to be amazing how we get to practice medicine 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Awesome.
I think, people need to keep thinking positive, right? Because there is some cynical, pessimistic thinking in medicine sometimes with insurance companies, et cetera. But I think if you keep thinking about technology, cutting edge, and then at the end of the day, doing the right thing for your patient, which is obviously the overriding goal for any of this, you'll always be on the right side. Yeah, but so where can we find you? What is, how do people get in touch with you if they're interested in, whether it's software, becoming a contractor for you, how do people find out more information?
Yeah, mdintegrations.com is if you're interested in this particular opportunity. I consult with a lot of other companies. I have lots of other projects that I'm working on. And so you can find me on LinkedIn, Laura Purdy, send me a message. Sometimes it takes a minute to get through them all because you get a lot of spam on there too. But you can find me on LinkedIn. You're welcome to send me an email, or you can just find me through the website there. But I love to network and connect. And
likewise,
there's something out there for everybody. And I have a really large network in the industry of connections, and whether they're like good quality recruiters, not just the locums kind, but like good recruiters that do telehealth recruiting only, or companies that I know are looking for specialties, or just even helping like where to look to find, like Indeed. That's my like free tip for the day. Go to Indeed and type, nephrologist location remote, and you'll find it. It's remote, not in the state, and they're there.
Well, Dr. Laura Purdy, thank you so much for coming on today. Honestly, this is actually was fascinating for us. I think we both have these entrepreneurial spirits. I do a lot of clinical research. I do a lot of other things besides just traditional clinical ID, as does Dr. Coleman. We'll have to talk about it offline sometime. But, to see someone so bright and then entrepreneurial, but also, just cutting edge is very, and I mean this, very inspiring. So I want to thank you so much for, joining us today. Where are you joining us from, by the way? Because it's very cold over here. I'm just realizing my office is freezing. You look much more. Are you somewhere warm? I'm guessing you're from the South somewhere.
Yep, I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
I was going to say either Tennessee or Kentucky. I grew up in the South, although Coleman doesn't.
Here we go.
He doesn't think it's the South. I grew up in Southern Maryland. He's like, oh, Maryland's a northern state. But I grew up in the lower part of Maryland. So even though geographically.
What say you, Dr. Purdy? It's
below or above Southern Maryland, which again, I'm right by the southern part of Virginia, and I went to school in Richmond. I still think that's culturally the South, even if geographically it's in the middle. So we have this.
South Jersey is culturally the South. When you go into past
no, but Maryland, so you don't understand, when you cross Maryland, you cross the Chesapeake Bay. It's south of Mason-Dixon line. It is culturally the South. It might not be the deep South or the dirty South or whatever, but it's still the South.
Dirty South.
All right, so we'll have to debate this on our next show. But we want to thank our guest, Dr. Laura Purdy, so much for coming on today. Please reach out to her and link and network with her if you are interested. Until next time, I am your co-host, Dr. Suraj Saggar, with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Clinton Coleman. Until next time, be well.